Alright, we're going to install an X-Link on this Extreme. First thing to do is take off any kind of fairing that you have and remove these stock suspensions. So the fairing is off, and now we just need to remove the preload from the spring and remove that suspension. These battery packs we can leave attached on the controller, but we will just be able to move them down and lay the end right on the table, no problem. Okay guys, we have the suspension off, we have the battery packs to the side. The table wasn't wide enough for the packs to sit on, so we zip tied them. And right now is actually a really good time to check how tight the bolts are on the H-bar. I've found these to loosen up, and if those get loose, then these pillars can actually move a little bit independent, and that's when it's going to stress out your motor mounts. So before you install your suspension, I want you to double check all of your bolts, and if they are loose, take one out at a time and Loctite them. These are blind holes, so you are going to want to put a little bit of Loctite in the thread, some on the bolt, and then you should be good. And blue only, no red. So now that we make sure that those bolts are tight and Loctited, we are going to install the X-Link, and we're going to start by installing the top. So here's an X-Link right here. You'll notice that it does have the brass low tolerance bushings. But what we want to do if you don't have that is you want to take your stock bushing out of your same location at the top, and then you're going to want to press it into those top locations. You're going to take all your other bushings out and also put them in the linkage. I do include a little grease packet, and that's because I do like to put a little bit of grease in between the linkage and the frame. I'm going to put just a little grease on the shaft. All right. Make sure everything slides freely still. And then we'll do the same thing for the bottom bolts. Before we put this in though, I forgot we are going to install the seal for the middle where the shock used to mount. Now it's time to install the shock. We have a D&M 240 by 75 millimeter here. We're not going to use the hardware kit that it came with because the stock bolts are going to fit right in these eyelets. You'll notice I do have include two different kinds of shock spacers, a metric for metric shock and an inch imperial for imperial shocks like a Marzocchi or a Fox or anything like that. So the shorter ones are for metric because this is a little bit bigger, And the Imperial shock has a little bit skinnier one, so they need a little bit longer bushing. To install the shock, what we're going to do is actually push this wheel up, because you see we can't really get to the upper bolt. So when we push it up, we're going to be able to slide a bolt here. So you're going to want to put the top bolt in and then the bottom bolt. Make sure the shock doesn't have any kind of preload on it at all. Alright, so we're installing the top of the shock. We do have our bolt right here. One side does have a nylock nut, and we're going to tighten that until the threads come to about the edge of the nylock nut. We don't want this as tight as possible. It's kind of one of those feel things. And yeah. So I'm just going to tighten it. Feel how tight the shock is. Still feels really good. My threads are right to the end of the nylock, and I think I'm going to leave that. Now that we have the top of the shock installed, we need to pull this wheel down so that we can install the bottom. This lower one is going to take a stock bolt, and it's going to take the longer spacers. So yeah, just make sure that there is no preload on the spring, and then we'll just install it. What I found to kind of help out is this rebound. If you close it all the way, that slows down the rebound. We can compress the shock a little bit, and it'll let us easier put the bolt through there. You see right now, it does need to be compressed just a little bit. It's not a bad thing. That means we're always going to have tension on our suspension, which is good. Now that we have all the bolts in and everything, and before we put a lot of preload on the spring, we just want to check to make sure everything's tight and there isn't any kind of play anywhere. Now it's time just to put some preload, and it's really hard to put any kind of wrench on here, but you really don't want to have that much preload. So what you're going to want to do is just twist both the ring and the spring, and you're only going to want a few turns. Really, you want the minimum amount of preload, enough to where the spring isn't moving. If you need to put a lot of preload just to get the sag that you want, then you really need to bump up your spring rate. And now that we have a little bit of preload on there, we can actually reinstall the battery packs and yeah, put it on the ground. One more thing before we put the battery packs, I am going to put the little dust caps on, and those go in the lower locations, these bottom 4 bolts. So what we're going to do is just use a little bit of E6000. You're going to put a little dab inside the bolt hole and then just snap the caps on. Now that the battery packs are back on, we do need to put the battery spacers that are included with your kit. You'll notice we do have 8, so one's going to go on the top and bottom of each pack. I do include 8 so that you can match the front packs with the back. That way you don't have any kind of weird angle or anything.